The call came in at 7:14 in the morning on a Saturday, 11 days after my wedding. I know the exact time because I'd been awake since 5. Not because I was anxious about anything, just because that's what happens when you're 31 and you've spent the last 3 weeks running on adrenaline, planning the final details, managing family drama at the rehearsal dinner, crying in a good way at the altar, honeymooning for 5 days in Tofino. And then suddenly, everything stops and your body doesn't know what to do with the quiet. So I was lying there in our new bed, in our new apartment, listening to the rain on the window, watching the ceiling, feeling something I could only describe as settled. Like I had finally arrived somewhere I'd been walking toward for a long time. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up without really thinking. The number wasn't saved, but the area code was local. "Is this Cassidy Ford?" "Speaking," I said. "This is Dr. Renata Oliveira calling from Westgate Health Clinic. I'm sorry to call so early on a weekend. Do you have a moment?" I sat up. My husband, Liam, was still asleep beside me. I could hear his breathing, slow and even. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice low. "What's this about?" She paused for just a second. "I'd prefer to speak with you in person if that's possible. Could you come in today? Today? Is everything okay?" Another pause. Shorter this time, but I felt it. "There's something we need to go over regarding the results from your recent visit. It's important that we speak privately." She emphasized the last word in a way that didn't sound like a routine appointment reminder. "If you're able to come in, please come alone. And please don't discuss this with your husband before we've had a chance to talk." I didn't say anything for a moment. Outside, the rain was steady against the glass. Liam shifted in his sleep, and I turned toward the window so he wouldn't hear whatever was on my face. "What time?" I asked. Liam and I had met at a work conference in Ottawa. I was there representing the property management company I'd been with for 4 years, and he was presenting on behalf of a mid-size engineering firm out of Vancouver that had just opened an office in Toronto. We were seated at the same table during a networking lunch that neither of us particularly wanted to attend, and within 20 minutes we'd figured out that we both hated networking lunches, that we'd both grown up in mid-size Ontario cities, and that we both had strong opinions about why the best diners in Canada were all in small towns and not cities. He was easy to talk to. That was the thing about Liam. He didn't make you feel like you were auditioning for something. We did long distance for 8 months. He was still in Vancouver. I was in Toronto. And then his firm made the Toronto office permanent, and he transferred. He moved into my apartment in Leslieville. That was 14 months before the wedding. I want to be clear about something. I didn't have doubts. That's not what this story is. I've heard people say they had a gut feeling, a small voice, a nagging thing in the back of their mind. I didn't have that. Not once in 2.5 years did I feel like something was wrong. Either I was very trusting or Liam was very careful. Probably both. We got tested together about 6 weeks before the wedding. It was my idea, honestly. I'd read something about how many couples don't bother, and I thought, we're about to be married, we're adults, let's just do it properly. Liam didn't hesitate. He said, "Sure, that makes sense." We went to Westgate Clinic together, did the blood work, got the forms signed. Mine came back in a week. Clear. Liam's, he told me, also came back clear. That was what he told me. The clinic was a 20-minute streetcar ride from our apartment. I went alone, like Dr. Oliveira had asked. I told Liam I was going out for coffee and to pick up a few things from the grocery store. He was half awake when I said it, and he just nodded and rolled over. Westgate was a small private clinic on Danforth, the kind of place with real plants in the waiting room and classical music playing at a volume low enough that you could almost forget it was there. Dr. Oliveira met me in her office rather than an exam room, which I noticed. She was in her early 50s, with short, dark hair and the kind of careful expression that I imagine they teach in medical school. She offered me tea. I said no. "Thank you for coming in," she said. I sat down across from her desk. My hands were in my lap. I remember being acutely aware of how still I was holding them. "When your husband came in for his follow-up appointment on Thursday," she said, "he disclosed something to one of our practitioners that I feel you have a right to know." She paused. "I want to be transparent with you. This is not a conversation I take lightly. But in the province of Ontario, under certain circumstances, public health guidelines allow us to contact a patient's partner directly when there is a potential risk to that partner's health. We believe this is one of those circumstances." I looked at her steadily. "Okay, your husband's initial test results from 6 weeks ago were not, in fact, clear," she said. "There was a result that flagged for chlamydia. He was contacted at that time and given the option to notify you himself or to allow us to do so. He chose to handle it himself." She held my gaze. "Based on his disclosure on Thursday, it appears he did not inform you." The rain outside had followed me there. I could hear it on the window behind her. "He told me his results were clear," I said. "I understand. We had unprotected." I stopped, breathed. "We've been together for 2.5 years. Since the tests I've been." "I know," she said quietly. "That's why we called. We'd like to test you today if you're willing. Chlamydia is very treatable and there's a good chance you're fine, but we want to be sure." I nodded. I don't remember deciding to nod. I just did. She also told me, gently and carefully, that when Liam had come in on Thursday, it was not his first follow-up appointment at Westgate. According to the records, he had been in twice in the past year for STI testing, on dates that had nothing to do with our joint appointment 6 weeks prior. She was telling me this because she thought I should have the full picture. I asked her to repeat the dates. She did. I wrote them down on a piece of paper she slid across the desk. My handwriting was steady. I don't know how. I tested clear that morning. Dr. Oliveira said it was likely because chlamydia doesn't always transmit, and because I'd had no symptoms. She gave me a prescription anyway, explained the treatment, and made sure I had a number to call if I had questions. I walked out of the clinic at 9:42 in the morning and stood on Danforth in the rain for probably 3 full minutes before I remembered I had an umbrella in my bag. There's a particular kind of stillness that comes after you've received information that rearranges everything. It's not shock exactly. It's more like your brain has received a memo and is quietly updating every file it has, going back through every memory it stored under a different label and relabeling it. I stood there in the rain and I thought about the 2 dates I had written on that piece of paper. One was in March. The other was in August. March was the month Liam and I went to Montreal for a long weekend to celebrate my birthday. He'd planned the whole trip. He'd booked the hotel, made the dinner reservations, surprised me with tickets to see a show. It was one of the best weekends we'd had. August was the month he flew back to Vancouver for what he said was a work thing. His old team, he told me, was doing a farewell event for a colleague who was retiring. He brought me back a candle from a shop in Gastown and said he wished I could have been there. I stood on Danforth in the rain, and I understood very clearly that I had been very wrong about something. I didn't go home right away. I went to a cafe a few blocks from the clinic and ordered a large coffee and sat at a corner table near the window. I took out my phone. I opened my banking app first. I don't know why that was the first thing I reached for, but it was. We had a joint account we'd opened 3 months earlier. I had never looked at it very carefully. I trusted him. I scrolled through. The transactions were ordinary. Groceries, transit, a Canadian Tire purchase, I remembered. A few restaurant charges. Then I looked at the dates. In August, while Liam was supposedly in Vancouver for a work event, there were 2 restaurant charges in Toronto, small amounts, breakfast, maybe. Or coffee. On a Wednesday and a Thursday. His flight had left on a Tuesday. I put my phone face down on the table. I am the kind of person who solves problems by making a list. So that's what I did. In the Notes app on my phone, I started a list. Not of feelings, just of facts. What I knew, what I didn't know, what I needed to find out before I made any decisions about anything. Fact: Liam had tested positive for chlamydia 6 weeks before our wedding. Fact: he did not tell me. Fact: he had been tested at Westgate on 2 previous occasions, in March and in August, both times without mentioning it to me. Fact: there were bank transactions in Toronto that contradicted his claim that he had been in Vancouver in August. Unknown. The full extent of what had been happening. Unknown. Who else was involved? Unknown. Whether the wedding, the ring, the lease we'd just signed on our new apartment together, whether any of it had been real, or whether I'd been one part of a life he was running in parallel with something else entirely. I didn't cry in the cafe. I finished my coffee. I paid. I tipped well because it was a Saturday and I waited tables in university, and Saturdays are hard. Then I went back out into the rain and I started to figure out what I was going to do. The next 11 days are difficult to describe in a way that makes sense from the outside. I went to work. I made dinner. I laughed at things Liam said. I slept next to him and did not flinch. I don't say that to sound cold. I say it because I needed to be sure. I needed to not make a decision based on one side of a story before I had gathered enough to see the shape of the whole thing. I called my older sister Trish on the second day. Not to tell her everything, just to hear her voice and to have someone know, in some approximate way, that I was not entirely fine. Trish lives in Hamilton. She's 8 years older than me, and she's the person I call when I need someone who won't catastrophize and who also won't pretend everything is okay when it isn't. I told her I'd found out something about Liam and that I was still looking into it. She said, okay. She said, call me when you know more. She said, do you need me to come to Toronto? I said, not yet. She said, okay, that was enough. On day 4, I found the emails. Liam and I shared a family Google account, for streaming mostly the way couples do. I had never read his email. It wasn't something I'd thought to do. But I went in looking for a specific receipt for a shared purchase, and I was in the wrong inbox, and there was a thread at the top from a name I didn't recognize. Her name was Brooke. I didn't read every email. I read enough. The thread went back 14 months. It started about 6 weeks after Liam moved to Toronto. It started 2 weeks after he had officially moved into my apartment. Brooke lived in Vancouver. She worked at the engineering firm. Not the same team, but the same building. Based on what I read, she believed that Liam and I were having problems. That was the word she used, problems. She asked him once, in a message from the previous winter, whether he had told me yet. He said he was working up to it. He said things were complicated. He said he just needed a little more time. The retirement event in August hadn't been a retirement event. He'd gone back to Vancouver to see her. I closed the email. I sat at our kitchen table for a long time. I looked at the framed photo on the counter we'd put up the week after we moved in. One from our wedding, the two of us, just after the ceremony, both laughing at something I can't even remember now. We looked genuinely happy. I think we were. I think I was. I think I still don't entirely understand how both of those things can be true. There's something specific that happens when you've been deceived by someone you loved without reservation. It's not like the betrayal I'd imagined in the abstract, the dramatic kind, the kind in movies where everything falls apart loudly. It's quieter. It's the particular horror of realizing that the person sitting across from you at dinner last night, who made you laugh and poured you a glass of wine and said they were tired and went to bed at 10. That person knew something you didn't. That person had been choosing, repeatedly, deliberately, to let you not know. On day 9, I called a lawyer. Her name was Adaze. She'd been recommended by a friend of mine who'd gone through a divorce 2 years earlier. She was thorough and she was direct. I told her what I had. She walked me through what the process would look like. We had been married for just over 2 weeks. We had a joint account. We had a lease. We did not have shared property. She said, given the timeline, the cleanest path was to proceed quickly and clearly. She explained what I would need. She explained what I was entitled to. I took notes. I want to be honest about something. I had not decided, not irrevocably, by day 9. I kept thinking, somewhere in the back of my mind, that there was something I was missing, some explanation that would make the shape of this different. I didn't believe that, exactly. But I wanted to be fair. I wanted to give myself enough time to be completely certain. Day 11 was what made me certain. I was doing laundry, ordinary Saturday afternoon laundry, the kind you do without thinking, and I found a receipt in the pocket of his jeans. It was from a hotel, not in Vancouver, in Mississauga. About 40 minutes from our apartment. Dated 3 weeks before our wedding. 3 weeks before our wedding, Liam had been in a hotel in Mississauga. He had told me he was at a 2-day project management workshop in Brampton with colleagues from his firm. He had even texted me from it. He had described the hotel breakfast and complained about the coffee and said he missed me. I stood in our laundry room holding that receipt, and I thought, that's it. That's the last piece. I chose a restaurant in the annex. Somewhere public, somewhere I'd been before, somewhere I felt steady. I texted Liam in the afternoon and asked if he wanted to go out for dinner, that I'd been craving Italian. He said that sounded perfect. He suggested we try somewhere new. I said I'd already made a reservation. I got there first. I ordered a sparkling water and I sat with my back to the wall and I watched the door. Liam came in looking exactly like himself. Jacket, slightly damp from the short walk, from the car, same easy smile he'd always had. He leaned down to kiss my cheek and said it smelled great in there and picked up the menu. We talked for a few minutes about ordinary things. A news story he'd heard on CBC in the afternoon. His mother's plans to visit in October, whether we wanted to get a dog, and then I put down my water glass and I said, I need to ask you something. He looked at me over the top of the menu. Yeah? When we got tested 6 weeks before the wedding, I said, what did your results say? There was a pause, very small, the kind that wouldn't register to most people. I've replayed it many times since. Clear, he said, same as yours. I looked at him. He held my gaze, and I will say this for Liam. He was genuinely good at that. He didn't look away. He didn't do the thing that people do when they're lying and they know they've been caught. He just looked at me calmly, like he was telling the truth, like he'd said it so many times in his head that it had calcified into something that felt real. I spoke to Dr. Oliveira at Westgate, I said. She called me 11 days ago. Your results were not clear. You'd tested positive for chlamydia. The menu came down slowly. Cassidy. You were tested twice more at that clinic, I said, before our joint appointment, once in March and once in August. I have the dates. In August, you told me you were in Vancouver for a work event. There are bank transactions that say otherwise, and I found your emails. I said the last part quietly. I wasn't angry. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't raised. I wasn't any of the things I had imagined I might be. I was just done. I'm not here to have an argument, I told him. I'm here because I thought you deserved to hear it directly, from me, in person, that I know, that I've known for 11 days, and that I've already spoken to a lawyer. He started to say something. I don't remember what the first word was. Something that sounded like the beginning of an explanation. I don't want an explanation, I said. I genuinely don't. Whatever was happening, the testing, Vancouver, the hotel in Mississauga, I don't need to understand all of it right now. Maybe at some point I will, but not tonight. I put some cash on the table for my water. I'll have my things out of the apartment this week, I said. Trish is coming from Hamilton to help. Adaze will be in touch about the rest. I stood up and I put on my coat. Liam was still sitting there, one hand flat on the table, the menu on the seat beside him, looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. I couldn't fully read it. Something between disbelief and the specific look of someone who has realized that the version of events they had been managing carefully for a long time has collapsed all at once. I hope you figure out what it is you actually want, I said, and I meant it. Not as a parting shot. I genuinely did. Then I walked out. Trish drove up from Hamilton 2 days later with her pickup truck and a friend of hers named Kim who didn't ask any questions and just helped carry boxes. My friend Ro came with coffee and did not leave my side for 3 hours. I took what was mine. I did not take anything that wasn't. I was back in my old neighborhood in Leslieville, staying in the spare room at Ro's place by the end of that week. The separation agreement went through without much friction. We had not been married long enough for it to be complicated. Adaze was efficient. Liam did not contest anything. He texted me once, about 3 weeks later. He said he was sorry. He said things had been more complicated than they looked. He said he hoped I was okay. I didn't respond, not because I was still angry. Honestly, by that point, the anger had mostly resolved into something quieter and harder to name. Something like the particular sadness of closing a door on a room you'd thought you'd be living in for the rest of your life. I didn't respond because I didn't have anything to say that would have been useful to either of us. I've thought a lot in the months since about what I would tell someone in a similar position. Not advice, exactly. Just observations from someone who's been on the other side of it. The first is that the worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. The worst part was the revision. Going back through 2.5 years of memories and understanding that some of them were real and some of them were performance and not always being able to tell which was which. The second is that clarity comes slowly, and that's okay. I didn't know what I felt until months after I felt it. I still don't entirely know. The third is that I made every single decision myself. No one told me to leave. No one told me to stay. No one mapped it out for me. I took 11 days and I got certain, and then I walked into that restaurant and I said what I had to say, and I walked back out, and I did not fall apart. I'm proud of that even now. Even knowing how much of the aftermath was hard and quiet and unglamorous. People ask me sometimes whether I regret the wedding, the ceremony, the dress, the whole thing. I don't, actually. I think that's the honest answer. I meant every word I said that day. I walked toward that future in full sincerity. That wasn't a mistake. That was faith, and it didn't go the way I thought it would. But I don't think you can look back at trust and call it a failure. I found a new apartment in February. It's on the Danforth, maybe 10 minutes from the clinic where all of this started. I can see the streetcar from my window in the mornings. I make coffee and I watch the city come to life, and I think about how strange it is that you can go through something that feels entirely like an ending and emerge on the other side, still so completely, stubbornly here. I still love small-town diners. I still think the best ones are never in cities. Some things turn out to be fully yours in ways that no one can revise.